Hello world, my name is Tim Roswick and welcome to another video by Game Dev Underground where I help you build, finish, and launch better games. Today we're going to talk about minimum viable product, minimum viable game, and specifically how I personally kind of build my projects to where not only am I getting constant feedback, not only am I iterating constantly, but I make sure that I don't overscope in any one way. And there are always problems, there's flaws with every process, but I want to kind of talk about a little bit specifically on how to stop yourself from committing to too much in any one area that you may throw away, or how to prototype a game in a way where you always have something playable and you always have something that you are iterating and improving upon. So the number one thing when it comes to this is the whole MVP concept, minimum viable product. And I want to start by talking about how people get that wrong, because it's a pretty popular concept. It's popular in the startup world. It's in a book called The Lean Startup, which I have up here. I recommend you checking out. I believe that's where the concept originated, but it applies to games. It applies to art in general. I think if you want to get a product out, right? You want to have a commercial viable product, and especially in software, I think it's important to start with the minimum thing, because your brain, as Chris Delian would say, is a horrible emulator. And the problem with horrible emulation in your brain is that when you think of a thing, you think, oh, what if we had an RTS where you could like go into every character and then like play it like an FPS, and like it's an MMO where like other people can connect to the game too, and like then it's this giant battle, and that sounds cool, right? It sounds awesome. That's like every 12-year-old's dream, and we would love to play that game. But when you actually get into the nitty-gritty of it, some things start to break down. Like the version of it in your head is not the same thing that comes out. And there's a variety of reasons for that. One could be technical skill. One could be actual laws of physics, like latency and how all that stuff works. One could be, just straight up volume of people, man hours, the ability to get something of a scale done. Thousands of things could come in there. And the problem with that is that we don't actually know the value of a thing. We don't know how fun a thing is. We don't know how a thing feels until it's sitting in front of us. So how do you take your vision in your head that is incomplete, right? Because your brain is like making up things like physics, right? Your brain doesn't take into account what the physics formula is for jumping and how fast the gravity is and how fast it pulls you down, right? When you're thinking about, oh, what if you jumped and you grappling hooked, and you got this little vision in your head of this dude jumping, grappling, and it's perfect, right? But when you build the thing, you have to figure out what the mathematical formulas are, and the thing in your head might not actually apply any kind of math or make any sense at all, and it could give you the same feeling without ever even being possible to build. Right? So how do you build the right thing when you can't accurately test the thing in your brain? Well, you got to start small, because if you start with the bigger vision, you could end up building something that just doesn't work. You can end up building something massive that takes a ton amount of time that just was never feasible from the start. And that is something you want to avoid, because as an indie developer, and especially like me as a solo developer, if I make a mistake like that and I spend a year on something that doesn't work, that could be suicide for my business. That could be game over, right? Like if you're living off savings trying to release an indie game and then use that money to make the next game, making a 6-month or a year-long mistake is pretty rough. You don't want to make those mistakes, but mistakes are vital to growth. So how do you minimize the impact your mistakes have, and how do you build the minimum viable product that you can make without having to invest too much time? Well, let me tell you, there's a graphic I found online that I want to share with you. First of all, what a lot of people think they try to do is this whole thing with functionality here, right? They try to get the minimum functional product, not the minimum viable product, right? They just try and get it working. But the problem is this is only part of the thing, right? This is one piece to a whole bunch of steps. And if you think about, like, let's look at this top one here, beauty, right? If you think about the triangle of beauty, it goes without saying that an aesthetically beautiful game is just more pleasing to look at, right? Matter of fact, an aesthetically beautiful game might even give you some edge that other games have. It might even deliver your feeling or your emotion better because people understand it better, right? If it's usable, like what are the controls? If you got it working, if you got it functional, right? Like let's say you're building a city builder game and you can click on buildings and you can place them, right? But there's a bunch of hotkeys and there's a bunch of controls and the player doesn't know how to use that controls. The game's not usable. It's functional. Like if they knew how to play it, they could play it, but it's not usable. It's not learnable. It's not, a normal person can't pick up the game and figure out what to do, right? There's no tutorial. There's none of that. Reliability, you may have got it working, but like it's full of bugs and shit. And the problem with it not being usable too is that like players can't tell what's not usable and what's not reliable. They can't tell the difference. Sometimes if they encounter a bug, they're like, oh, I don't understand why it did that. And then sometimes if they encounter a bug, they're like, oh, that's a bug. And they think everything that goes wrong from that point in the game is a bug. It happened to me. Okay. So building the core functionality of the game is not the way that you build an MVP. It's this triangle that I think is beautiful, right? The minimum viable product is not the minimum functional product. It is the sum total of what makes a game a game. And we have another term for this. It's called vertical slice. And it's basically, this is kind of a representation of what a vertical slice is. It's a slice of this vertical triangle. Okay. It is pieces of everything, right? The game looks and feels somewhat complete, but it's only a piece. It's only a slice. And some games are harder to get to vertical slice than others. For example, if you're making an MMO, just getting all that netcode in is going to be a huge hurdle. If you're making a single screen platformer, making a game with 5 levels, right? A platformer game with 5 levels is going to be great vertical slice territory. Whereas, maybe like a procedurally generated roguelike, you're going to have to build the bulk of the game to get to a vertical slice, which, you have to understand the trade-offs between all that stuff. But the idea is that you want to get a little bit of everything in there so that people can understand what the game is supposed to be. And if you start with this initial investment takes a little bit of time, right? Like all the functionality's not there. It's not all reliable. It's not completely usable. It's not 100% beautiful, but enough of that is there to where you have the minimum of what your game should be. And this is a great way to iterate, because if you think about how most people do this, right, is they go with the functionality. They start with 1 wheel, they start with 2 wheels, then they put a body on it, then they got a car. But these people are not learning things every step of the way. And this whole time right here, all of this process, this 3/4 of their entire game dev process, their game is not playable. And since it's not playable, they're not getting feedback. And if they're not getting feedback, they don't know if they're going off course. They don't know if people are going to like it. They don't know if the game is fun because they can't play it all the way through this process. Whereas if you think about this process, right, if you start with something like a skateboard, and then you move to something like a scooter, and then you move to something like a bike, and then a motorcycle, do you see how it's usable every step of the way, right? This thing is not the complete thing. A skateboard does not equal a car, but a skateboard is usable and it gets you moving, and a scooter does too, and a bike does too, and a bike with a motor does too, and then a car does. Even though it looks like the car has 2 wheels, it has 4. That is the idea of an MVP or an MVG, minimum viable game, right? It's not a minimum thing. Oops. It's a minimum viable thing. If I press the wrong button to show you a pink screen. You know what? This is the minimum viable video, okay? This is the minimum video that I got to make to get my point across. You see what I'm saying? I follow this philosophy. So I didn't have the chance to do this with Phylophobia. I don't really think I understood this concept well enough to really apply it to Phylophobia, which was the first commercial game I did. But with Cypherpunk, my second commercial release, I've definitely applied this, and we have a vertical slice now of like what the game is. And so now everything is about iterating on top of that thing. Like I really understand the core of the game, and now I've just got to add things in, right? I've got to add content, I've got to add progression, I've got to add sound effects. But the core, the vertical slice of like what this thing is there, and I understand it. And I think especially for solo developers, especially for smaller developers, it's more beneficial to start with a solid thing and iterate onwards than to try and put in the massive investment on a bigger project and figure that out on the back end. Because you can't afford, well, at least I can't afford a 6-month or a year mistake, right? That as a business owner and a solo developer, like that would cripple me. And that's not what I want. So hopefully this helped you understand a little bit about what MVP is, what MVG is, and how you can use it to make better games. If you haven't, I recommend you check out my Patreon on Game Dev Underground, patreon.com/GameDevUnderground. We have a bunch of resources and tools and things that will help you become a better developer if you want to check that out. We also have an exclusive community on Discord. I recommend you check the link down below of thousands of game developers all around the globe. If you join Patreon, you actually get a special role and a special access to a chat room where a bunch of elite members hang out, and I recommend you check that out. But I want to say thank you to everybody that helps me keep doing what I'm doing, helps me keep making these videos. You guys are awesome. Thank you for watching. I appreciate you being here. My name is Tim Ruswick, and I will see you again in the next video.